My guest for this episode is Jack Barsky. Jack is one of those guys that the American counter-espionage establishment was really afraid of. He was a KGB sleeper agent. What makes Jack really special is not only the fact that he never was detected while he was active, or that he made the rather one-sided decision to quit the KGB so that he could stay in the USA with his family, but that he's actually still around to tell his tale. To put this into perspective, just remember the recent high-profile incidents where the Russian victims were not so lucky. Jack had an extraordinary life, no matter how you look at it. At a basic level, I had the feeling that he's transparent about his past, but I have no illusions that he still carries many secrets that he cannot share, especially when it comes to what he told the Americans once the FBI found him almost 10 years after he retired from the KGB. While our discussions evolved around his past, we also spoke about what he did to win other people's trust, if it's better to follow their own gut feeling or the brain in hairy situations, and about the ever more sophisticated means of manipulation that we all are exposed to, no matter if we live in Moscow, New York, or Paris. If you think that you're not perceptive to manipulation, think again. The public relations industry is expected to exceed $100 billion in 2022, and that does not even include the vast sums of money that goes into projects that are hidden from the public. Some people still remember Sigmund Freud, but very few people know about his nephew Edward Bernays. Freud's nephew is the reason that we believe that bacon and eggs is a healthy American or, depending where you live, English breakfast. He's the man who, in the 1920s, persuaded women to smoke by calling cigarettes torches of freedom. Today we see this kind of manipulations perfected and magnified in the echo chambers of social media, which is why Jack is warning that the West may be in trouble, but not for the reasons you might expect. What follows is what I found in interesting discussions with an intriguing and surprisingly lucid man. A man who looks back at his life with the distance required to avoid self-deception. I hope you enjoy. Okay, Jack, here we are. Thanks for joining, Jack Barsky. I just heard from you that you had an interview with the CNN. That was new to me, although I did a lot of research. So how did it go?
This was Sunday afternoon. It went incredibly well. I wasn't happy with it because I'm the only one who knows what I should have said and I didn't say. But everybody else was very complimentary, and this interview was posted by CNN on YouTube. It has already 3 million views.
Wow. I haven't seen it yet. It's the next thing I'm gonna do. That's the next thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna look at this interview. Okay. What was the topic? I mean,
it was Ukraine, particularly Putin, and what I think of him and what I know about him and so forth. It's 6 minutes, and you can find it on YouTube by searching Barsky, CNN Barsky KGB. That pops right up.
I will find it. Mm-hmm. I was really looking forward to this interview, Jack. I prepared a little bit, of course, and in the back of my mind, I knew your name since a long time, right? Mm-hmm. There would be many topics that would be really interesting to discuss with you, right? So how it is to be a spy, how to live the life of a spy, yeah. Mm-hmm. Of course, also your specific life and what you have achieved. Yes, the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, it's very tempting, yeah? And we probably will scratch these topics to some extent, right? But yeah,
that is like now 24/7.
I know.
All Ukraine, all the time, and when you keep on listening to the various news stations, you hear the same thing over and over and over again. And most everybody is guessing. Very few people have real information, and so then they repeat each other's guesses, and it gets really, really boring. I don't listen anymore.
I know. And we are living in this Western bubble where we get all the same information all the time from all directions. I'm fully aware of
Yes.
Yeah. So what I indicated when we organized this, or when we tried to organize this conversation, was actually that I'm most interested in the psychological side of it.
Yeah,
right?
I understood.
This is also the direction that I would like to go, despite the fact, and I said it already, it's very tempting to discuss some other topics too. Yeah, and maybe there's some overlap here, but the main focus, if we can, would be great if we can keep it on the psychological side of it.
Yeah, that's Very interesting to me, and I wish some neurologist could get a hold of me and examine my brain, because it's an odd organ that is not normal. Okay, it has features of manufactured dual personality for sure, and I can talk about this.
I think you have to have, if you live at least a double life.
Right.
Absolutely, and over so many years. Yeah. So before we come into that, I have a little bit of information collected about you in a nutshell. I hand it then over to you. Yeah. So you're actually born in Germany, if I understood this correctly, as Albert Dietrich, right?
That's correct, and you actually pronounced it rather well. Americans can't pronounce this name.
Yeah, that is probably due to the fact that I'm fluent in German, right?
Yeah.
So you're
and
also
you sound like you have even a German accent.
Yes.
When you say German. Yeah.
Undeniable. You're absolutely right. I think one of the interesting facts about your life is that you were from 1978 to 1988 a sleeper agent in America, and you were never really found out. Only after the Cold War ended, I think 8 or 9 years after the Cold War ended,
right?
Through some counter espionage. You were discovered. Yeah, so it's a really interesting part, because not only you were never found out, but you're also here. You live to tell the tale today, right?
Yeah. Right. And the way I was discovered was because of a defection. That was already Russia at the time. A defection by a fellow who had worked in the KGB archives. And he, over time, smuggled a ton of information, handwritten on little pieces of paper, out of the KGB archive, and eventually wound up handing this to MI6. And amongst the notes, there was just a little bit saying there's a fellow by the name of Jack Barsky who's living in the northeast of the United States. And if my name had been John Miller, they wouldn't have found me. Jack Barsky was rare enough, so the FBI, when they started searching, they very quickly found out there's a guy who got a Social Security card late in life, and Jack Barsky, that's probably him, and that was real easy at that point.
And you then managed to become a U.S. citizen. So how did it go? Very briefly, from sleeper spy to U.S. citizen.
Well, when the FBI finally decided to introduce themselves, which it took them 3 years of very careful investigation, simply because they knew one thing about me, just one thing, that I was an extremely well-trained agent. And if I was still active and they wouldn't be careful, I would find out that I'm being investigated. So they were really, really cautious, and hung back and did a lot of visual observation. They actually wind up buying the house next door and had a couple of agents live there. Anyway, so after about 3 years, they finally introduced themselves, and that was a big surprise for me. And but I handled it pretty well. At that point, my allegiance to communism had completely disappeared. The Soviet Union didn't exist anymore. Germany was so far away from me. I had already become the person I was supposed to become, namely an American. So, and I had a wife and 2 children, and so I had every reason to fully cooperate, and I did. And after about 6 weeks of debriefing sessions and passing a lie detector test, I was told that I was allowed to stay in the country, and there was a way to citizenship. It took a while, but I got my citizenship like 6 years ago.
That's actually one of the things that I was wondering. It took quite a while still. That
has something to do with government bureaucracy. So, this is a guess, but I think the guess is pretty good. So, to get the green card, that went rather quickly, and then we decided to go to the official way. In other words, not get the citizenship, behind closed doors. Apply after 5 years of green card, you can apply for citizenship. And I was called into an interview, and the fellow who interviewed me had no clue that I had this weird past. So he asked me this one question. He asked me, "Are you still a German citizen?" And I said to him, "Honestly, I don't know." And so this is what I think happened. He then took the application and put it on the "let's look at this later" pile. And then the FBI was looking, they were actually then getting in touch with the State Department, and nobody knew where my application was. Eventually, one of the last liaison I had, active liaison from the FBI, made it his task to really find out what was going on, and eventually they found the application, and then it went like this. I got a phone call one day from Homeland Security, and they told me if I had time to come to the office next day. I said, sure. And so I was walked in there, they apologized, I was sworn in, and that was that.
And then the last little detail, you had then a year later, you had the 60 Minutes interview, and were linear rector fired from your IT job, right?
Well, they tried to fire me for cause, but they didn't have cause. I didn't violate any company rules, and I did not get this job under false pretenses. I used my green card, which was real, and so we did a little bit of negotiating, and we decided to separate amicably. And there's a non-disclosure agreement that I signed, and I got a severance. So that's how that worked. But I wasn't. Initially they were really angry, and that was the board of directors primarily, not the senior management. They were angry because it was a public relations issue for them. How come you have this, ex-KGB agent as an employee and you didn't know about it? You weren't doing due diligence and background checking. And the answer is really simple. The best background check that you could possibly apply wouldn't have found anything, because the FBI cleaned if I had any kind of record, even a traffic violation, it was clean. So anyway, it is what it is. So I left corporate America. Then I started. I had the time to write my book, and then I started a career in public speaking, and I feel actually that was a good thing that it happened, because life has become, and this is an interesting thing to say, life has become more interesting than it ever was, and that's a mouthful from somebody who lived the life I did as an agent and with all these things that happened in my life. But I get to talk to people like you, and I get to know a lot of really interesting, smart people from all walks of life. So it's all good.
Understand. So before we move on, I would like to mention your book. It's called Deep Undercover: My Secret Life and Tangled Allegiances as a KGB Spy in America.
And it's
a
also
really interesting read. Anyway,
if I may, it's also available in German translation. And the title I like even better than the American ones is Der falsche Amerikaner, the fake American.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good choice. Did you do the translation, or was it done by somebody?
No.
Or did you write it in German?
No, I cannot. I could not. My German. So the day-to-day conversation. It takes me about a week to get back into this. I'm fluent. I was on the Lunch Show, which is the #1 talk show in Germany. And that was after 4 weeks, having spent 4 weeks in Germany, and I did very well. You know, I wasn't looking for words. I wasn't halting. But I lacked the vocabulary and the ability to write good German. So it was translated by somebody, and I just looked it over to make sure that the translation sort of... I was okay with the translation, fundamentally.
So let's move on to the topic that I'm most interested in, and that is the psychological side of it, as I already said. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I know that you were, I think, first trained in Eastern Germany and then also in Russia itself for the KGB.
Yes, it started in Berlin.
And in terms of, let's say, deception detection, manipulation, eliciting information, persuasion, and other active measures. So if we could discuss at least some of them in the context of Yuri Bezmenov, right? I just
you have to bring up Bezmenov.
I know what you're gonna say. I know you're not a fan of him, and
no,
I'm not there to judge.
No, he made that up. I guarantee you, he made that up. Not that I'm not a fan. What he told people that he knew what the KGB was doing was not possible, and even if it had been possible, he would not have known this. The KGB was very good in compartmentalizing, and a secret plan like this would not have been known to a 2-bit agent in India. That's where he worked, in India.
Yes, I saw.
Okay, but having said that, active measures is real and was real, and the Russians are still involved in this.
So just to frame, I think it's better to be said, just to give an example of what I have in mind. Yeah, there is I have a quote of him in front of me from an interview that he gave in 1984, right?
Uh-huh.
And he said, the people of America, right? They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern, right? And he was alluding to Pavlov. You cannot change their mind. And again, he's speaking about the American people. Yeah, you cannot change their mind, even if you've exposed them to authentic information. Even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change their basic perception and logic of behavior. And I would like to put this in a psychological context here, because there are two cognitive biases involved, which are very well researched and very well known in science, right? So the first one is the Semmelweis effect, or Semmelweis reflex, actually, which is a tendency to reject new evidence that contradicts what you already believe. Yeah, and in tandem, cooperating with the Semmelweis reflex is the confirmation bias, right? Where you only accept things that confirm what you already believe. Yeah. Now, this statement that I quoted from Yuri, right? That I read this statement, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. But it showed me then, and I shouldn't be surprised that on that level, there is active, or how do you, if you want to call it like that, applied psychology on state level, right? Because he refers you to a program that takes at least 20 years and he even described those 4 states of subversion, destabilization, crisis, normalization, etc., etc. Yeah. Now, I only give this as an example. We do not have to discuss this. Yeah, this specific example.
Okay.
I'm more interested in what you, Jack, what you learned from the KGB, from the East Germans, in terms of manipulating, first of all, individuals. Yeah. In that context, and potentially also, the general public.
So the two effects that you mentioned, they're not necessarily exclusive to Americans. They're part of the human condition.
Yes,
we are seeing the results of those effects right now in U.S. society. When you are on the extreme left, You talk to only people who are on the extreme left, and we call it an echo chamber. And the right is, and they're looking at the same world, and they have a completely different view. And there's a lot of manipulation and delusion going on from the politicians, as well as some media. I mean, it is insane. You know, I wrote an essay a while ago, and I called it "Welcome to the World of Unreason." There is no more reasonable thinking in the public discourse. It's all about these two effects have fundamentally taken over. So now, as to your question, I was not trained at all in that regard. I got not a hint of psychological training. What the Russians, the Soviets did, they were carefully screening hundreds, thousands of people for a certain set of character traits. And once they had somebody like me with those traits, they knew I would be able to figure things out by myself. Unlike, like, for instance, the CIA trains their folks, and they're in classrooms and they get all kinds of training. None. The training I got was tradecraft and English, pretty much. Not an ounce of psychology, and very, very little cultural preparation. So when I came to the United States, I knew practically nothing about American life. And with regard to keeping secrets, becoming an American, and weaving, or just becoming another person, so people wouldn't look at like, what? Who is this? I had to work on this by myself, slowly and very carefully. With regard to active measures, I didn't know that active measures was a part of KGB terminology. I was not. We never discussed that. I was not supposed to participate in that. But through the fellow that gave away my name because of it was in the KGB archives, there are a number of pages in a book that came out of his notes. It's called the Mitrokin Archives, where he describes a number of successful active measures that they undertook. The rumors about the JFK assassination. Everybody knew at one point that J. Edgar Hoover was a secret cross-dresser that was fabricated by the KGB, and a lot of people knew that the AIDS virus was concocted in a CIA laboratory. So there were a few of those, but not a whole lot of them. And so Mitrokin does not have a hint in his notes about what Bezmenov is talking about, but I'm not going to go there anymore.
But from your perspective, there must have been some psychological strategies that you have applied to be able to work for 10 years undercover in the US.
It was primarily instinctive. So when I got to the US, I pretty much knew that I knew nothing. I didn't know about baseball. I didn't know about football. So I did watch a lot of TV. And for the first year, I had absolutely no social interaction. I got to know the city, New York. I watched TV. I went to the movies. I went to museums, and I took in life, but without interacting directly with the individuals. And then my first job, and again, this was not planned, but it turned out to be actually brilliant. I took a job as a bicycle messenger. And so for 3 years, I would carry packages from here to there on a bicycle. And in between those runs, I would sit in the office. And messengers, typically, they were all transients. They were temporary. Nobody really cared about who you are, where you came from, where you were going. So I was able to just listen to their conversations and didn't participate much. Just that gave me the foundation of what it was like to be an American. The KGB agents that trained me in Moscow sort of thought they knew, but they didn't, because they operated in New York and Washington D.C. as diplomats. So they didn't know what it would meant to apply for a job, to pay taxes, to for them, United States society was like a zoo. You go look at them and say, oh, that's interesting, but that's why the KGB looked for people like me who are they're keen observers, very careful, quick thinkers, and not afraid of of all kinds of situations and change. Adaptability was really important to them, and the ability to make good decisions on your own. Because anytime I asked Moscow a question, I got an answer within like 3 weeks, because the communication was not. I never met anybody. It was through secret writing and through Morse code, and then typically the answer was useless. So I made pretty much all the decision myself. That included eventually, when I went to college in the U.S., it included that I overrode what they told me I should major in economics. And I fell in love with information technology. So I told them, when I went back to Moscow one year, I told them, hey, by the way, I changed the major. They really did not argue with me with regard to my behavior and what I was doing. They trusted me, and I was successful.
Now, what you just said in regards to not having received any formal training in that sense. I've spoken to former FBI agents and also to a former Navy interrogator. It's a very similar story on the US side, right?
Oh, really?
So where I cannot talk about the CIA, but I have one specific FBI agent that I spoke with, who basically used very similar arguments like you just did.
Okay.
Learning and intuition,
yes,
and gaining experience, but not having a pool of vast, collected information that's being trained out within the company. On the contrary, basically, this knowledge is now sold by large corporations to law enforcement around the world. Yeah, and I mean, we could even discuss what type of interrogation techniques. The Reed model, John Reed, coming from John Reed, or from the UK, the Peace model, which is completely contrary, right? But that's not the direction I want to go here. Yeah?
Okay, but so, if you don't mind,
sure.
Were you talking about interrogation? That just triggered something. So when the FBI introduced themselves, eventually they drove me to a motel where they had a room, and they thought of using psychological trickery. So they had on a shelf. They had a bunch of binders with labels, and they were like thick, like maybe half a dozen binders, and I immediately, I looked at the labels, and I knew right away that all they knew about me was very early information, the beginning of my career. So they thought that could intimidate me, so they knew that much about me. I pretty much knew that they didn't. So whatever.
Coming back to on a very practical level, right?
Yeah.
How you survived those years in America. I mean, you must have learned how to avoid any clues and cues that would give you away. Yeah, on verbal, linguistic level, on non-verbal communication level, body language, and etc. etc. So how did you manage this?
I still have a residual, very light German accent. But in New York, that wasn't a big deal because there's all kinds of accents running around. And occasionally when somebody asks, you sound a little funny, what? And my answer was, and it was based on truth that according to the birth certificate of Jack Barsky, his mother's maiden name was Schwartz. So I told everybody, I grew up bilingual. And that shut them up right away. In my entire 10 years, there was one fellow who was a friend of mine, then, who one time came to my office, closed the door, and said, "Jack, something is not quite right about you. I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to try to find out, but there's something doesn't feel right." That guy could have been very dangerous. but there was really no problem, and I think the reason I succeeded is because I entered society very carefully, and I didn't really strike up close friendships. I had a couple of girlfriends, but I kept them at a distance. There was no intimacy. And the one woman that I wound up marrying, she was not dangerous at all because she was from South America. So she wouldn't have known that there's something not quite right about this American. I had this interesting observation by somebody I met and I had a love affair with. She was originally from Chile. And she told me many years later when I met her again, she told me that she had fallen in love with me too, and she told her friends at home. She said, I couldn't believe that I found an American who was just that interesting and so different from the Americans I thought I would get to know." So she had a clue. She thought I was an American, but an exceptional American. And no, it was my German still was shining through. One other thing. I was not aware of one feature of my communication that actually could have given me away, and that's highly aggressive truth-telling. Germans are in your face, and I said Germans will tell you what they think even if you don't ask them. Let me tell you what you're doing wrong here. So and one day. And I was already in the clear. That was after the FBI let me go and continue living here. But a friend of mine took me aside and he said the following: "Jack, everybody thinks you're an asshole." and I was like, "What? Me? I was trying to be nice." And when I finally realized, when I went back to Germany, and I had a conversation with my best friend. And I realized, oh my God, he's so aggressive. And that's me. So from that point on, I tried to soften my communication style. It doesn't completely work, I still have been labeled as brutally honest by practically everybody.
And there's definitely a difference in simply in culture between
yes.
Germany
and
America.
And people think, well, no, just Germans and Americans are very similar. It is a very faulty assumption, and there are some people that actually consult companies that operate in both countries how to interact with one another and be aware of other behavioral characteristics that you need to understand.
Through your experience, would you consider yourself very sensitive to nonverbal cues?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I have developed over time, because I've observed people since I was a child. I'm a very curious person, and I remember my parents would sometimes tell me, Albrecht, starr doch die Leute nicht so an. That means don't stare, because I always was trying to figure out who are they, what are they going to do next, and then when I became an agent, that became an absolute necessity. Trying to figure out who I'm talking with, how close I could get, and were they dangerous, or would they be in some way an interesting target for recruitment. And then I spent another 20 plus years in information technology, hiring and interviewing people. I now can state with certainty that in 95% of cases when I meet new people, within 10 minutes I know who they are. And,
okay, so
and
what are you looking for? What are you looking for?
No, it's I call this subconscious pattern recognition, and the pattern is language, how they speak, the words that they use, facial features, body language, and I'm not looking for something specific. There are books that tell you, what body language books. I read a couple. I'm not going with this. I have a bunch of patterns stored in this brain that I'm subconsciously comparing the impression that I'm getting from a new person, and I have proven this to myself over and over again that I'm really right on. It's not like a lot of specifics, but I know whether the person will be trustworthy, whether they're smart, and very, very basic. Would I like to interact with this person? My wife, who has been with me now for a dozen years, has confirmed this, because it happened several times that when she introduced a friend of hers, I would tell her, no good. And then a couple of years later, and I didn't know anything about him or her. It was just like, the people call this a gut, right? But I think it has to do with subconsciously recognizing patterns, how people are. So
it's a bit tricky with gut feeling, because again, how do you know ground truth? Yeah, how can you confirm? I mean, not you specifically, in general. Yeah, if you go for your gut feeling, there's definitely value there, because our limbic system picks up things unconsciously from the other person.
Right.
But how do we know that we are really, right here? Right?
No, you correct. You cannot ever state that you will be 100% correct. But when in the latter stages of my career in information technology, I conducted interviews, totally non-standard interviews. I would just talk to people about whatever. I didn't conduct technical interviews. I didn't ask aggressive questions. I talked to them, and I had a very good track record for hiring. It was I made one mistake, and that mistake was because when I allowed my logic to override my gut, and that was a really bad mistake. The fellow turned out to be dangerous to my career.
It reminds me very much, also the approach that you just mentioned reminds me very much on Hans-Joachim Scharf. Does the name ring a bell?
No, what did he do?
Hans-Joachim Scharf was an interrogator in the Second World War, and he interrogated hundreds of US and UK airmen that got shot down.
Mm-hmm.
He had this approach exactly like you said. He was just talking to them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They did not have the feeling at all that they were being interrogated.
Right, right, and that relaxes them. So their true being is probably more likely to come out. The moment you ask aggressive questions, the shields go up, and then then you're more conscious of what you're saying, and in a way try to manipulate your interrogator.
After the war, he went to the US and was actually teaching to US law enforcement the techniques. Again, this gut feeling techniques that he used.
That I'm glad you actually confirmed that somebody else who apparently was quite successful had used the same approach.
But he was not out for, let's say, deception detection. Also, he was actively eliciting information.
Yeah.
Some of the people that he interviewed were then, after the war, interviewed, right? Yeah. And they said they were talking basically about the weather, But the person that was interrogated by Hans Scharf said, "I'm sure he got what he wanted. I just don't know how and what it was."
Yeah, and by the way, the FBI still relies on the polygraph to detect deception, and the polygraph is also not 100%, but it is very reliable when there's a real expert is doing the testing. I give you my experience with a polygraph. The person that conducted the test was considered one of the best in the business because it's part science and part art. You know, there's a fine line between. That's why the reason the art part is the reason that the polygraph is not allowed in court. So I failed one question. And he came back and says, this question, I get a signal that you might not be telling the truth here. Much later, just a light bulb went up here, because the question was formulated as a double negative. And even though I had known all the question in advance, my brain took like just an extra second to understand the double negative, and so that was a control question. I had to fail it.
Double negative is a positive, right? A double negative is a positive, right?
Right, but it was a control question. I had to fail it. He was validating his own conclusions by putting this one control in there.
So how did you do this for yourself? I mean, when you were in a situation where it was essential for you to know if this person is trustworthy, truthful, etc., how did you do this for yourself?
I can't tell you any more than what I already told you. It's this gut instinct. And oh, by the way, I would not recommend the majority of people to go with their gut all the time, because it needs to be developed, it needs to be nurtured, and it's a lifetime of observations. And I've been told by folks, some strangers, some family, that I'm extremely aware of my environment. I constantly look around and I pick up things and connect dots. It's a talent. It's not something I worked on.
So the general public, we all, as humans, we are very prone to what's known as the truth bias, right?
Yeah.
So we are inclined to believe what people are telling us, because if we wouldn't, we as a human race, we wouldn't have evolved like we did. Yeah.
Yes, and here's something that I figured out. When you tell people a bunch of things, and they're all new to them, and let's say there are 9 lies, but one statement is absolutely true, and the individual knows that it's true, the believability of the others increases tremendously. Yeah, because we want to believe. And I fall for lies myself. Everybody does.
Yeah, many people believe that how longer you know somebody, the more you are inclined or capable of detecting if this person speaks the truth or not. Yeah, but we know from scientific evidence the reverse is true. Right? The better we know somebody, the more we are inclined to fall victim to the truth bias.
Yeah, because we have a trust relationship, and we want to trust, because if you go through life as a non-trusting individual, it's really miserable, because then everybody's your enemy. Yeah.
Miserable and lonely. Yeah. Now, if we could switch from, let's say, deception detection to elicitation of information, I mean, I would imagine that would be your core. I can't call it core business, but your one of your core tasks in those 10 years in America, right? Elicit information.
Yeah, I have to disappoint you there. The only information that I elicited from individuals was their personal preferences, their beliefs. I was operating as a spotter, a talent spotter. So particularly while I was in college, I was always told by the KGB headquarters, make more contacts. You need to feed us, candidates that we could recruit. So the only information that I elicited was really personal stuff, and my technique was the following: I volunteered a lot of personal information about myself. I would come in like with open arms, so to speak. Here, this is me, which generates a lot of trust, and people open up, and they might even tell you that they occasionally take drugs or something like that. That works very well. I've done this the entire time, even like I still do it today, because it makes it much easier to get closer to people without necessarily having a purpose, and establish a relationship.
Definitely. I mean, again, this is confirmed by many persons that I've spoken to from the FBI. The first thing is building rapport, building trust, building common ground.
Yep.
And building from there. And the same is true in negotiations. Yeah.
Common ground, very important. If you happen to know something, particularly this was in corporate life, if you happen to know something about, but it's generally true, something about the individual. For instance, they are a Yankee fan. You found out they're a Yankee fan. Well, you become a Yankee fan too, right? Common ground, very important. And then in corporate, when you speak to individuals who have a certain specialization, you need to use their language. So when you talk to a finance guy, you talk numbers. You speak to a marketing guy, you talk about, you become more dreamy and have a little more fantasy. Numbers are not important, and that applies to other situations as well. Try to understand the language, the type of language the individual speaks, and try to speak it to the extent you can.
And you said it quite right. I mean, it's literally mirroring the language, using the exact words for certain.
Yeah.
It's not, if it's a car, not a vehicle. These kind of things.
I can now state this with certainty because I've heard it many times. The degree of likability that I have is pretty high, and it's because I just learned. As a matter of fact, my wife, I have a friend who was naval intelligence, and we once had dinner together with the wives, and the two wives agreed with each other. They said, I don't know who my husband is because it depends upon the situation and who he's talking with. He's like a chameleon. So this fellow, my friend from naval intelligence, is he's displaying the very same character traits because he did the same work.
I saw quite a number of interview podcasts with you in preparation to this talk.
Yeah.
And I have to say that everybody is polite, yeah, but not everybody, and most of them are, of course, for a US audience. And you did those interviews, I guess, most of the time in the US, right?
Right.
So whilst many of those interviewers are polite, they are not always sympathetic, which I understand. Yeah? But you countered it always well. Yeah? In your replies to them, you always countered it well. And I took that for myself as a decision to approach you, right? To have a talk like that.
Okay. I had most recently, that was about 3 months ago, I had an interview where the interviewer aggressively argued with me. And guess what the topic was? Bezmenov. And it was fun.
I believe I saw that interview, and you, towards the end of the interview, you pointed out we did not prepare this. You put me on the spot, but I appreciate that you did this.
Yeah, because it was fun.
Yeah.
Because and it wasn't hostile. It was just like we really went at it in a friendly, like it was a friendly match. He called me back. I interviewed with him 2 weeks ago in studio.
Yeah, there was a third person in this. I saw that one too. There was a third person, a financial guy, was present in that interview.
Yeah. There was actually a team. There were altogether 3 people on his side and just me. But this one was more collegial. We didn't argue about Bezmenov.
Now, I don't want to discuss Russia and Ukraine. Yeah, that's not where I want to go. Yeah?
Okay.
But I would like to discuss. I think that the best word to describe it is propaganda, right? I mean, propaganda is old. I mean, it's older than Goebbels. It's older than the Second World War.
Oh, absolutely.
But with your knowledge and insight, let's say, and we don't need to point out sides because propaganda comes from every direction, right? From any camp, from any nation state, it's everywhere. Yeah.
Yes.
The point is that with the new technologies that we have at our disposal, propaganda gets more and more effective because you can pinpoint on individual level your audience, right? So in terms of what you see in social media, in broadcasters, in television, etc., what are the things that you are seeing in terms of propaganda? I mean specifically the strategies, the psychological strategies, yeah, applied. Anything you can identify?
Yeah, and this is where the Russians are quite effective. I have very good connections in the cybersecurity space, and I've heard this multiple times that people are saying that about 20% of what you find on Facebook comes out of Russia. And they use the same methods we use as human beings, but they have artificially developed persons that don't even exist, avatars that will go and they have a profile and it looks pretty real. They have a picture and then they join and then they look for groups that are already engaged in groupthink, somewhat extreme, and try to influence them and feed them more information to take them further down the path of lying and deception. And this is a very effective way to influence people these days. But you don't really need the Russians. Americans themselves do a great job feeding each other. It's like like-minded people then are driven to extremes where they believe in stuff that can't possibly be true. It's again, this is part of when I was talking about the world of unreason. We have lost the ability, for the most part, to approach life critically, critical thinking, connection of dots. And this, if this does not reverse, I think this could well mean the end of the Western world, because we get so fractionalized because of the extremes that we believe in, that there is no more unity in the nation right now. Like, it's left and right, but it's even more. We split up by ethnic groups, gender, or who we think we are with regard to gender, and on and on. We spend a whole lot of time fighting with one another instead of dealing with the threats that are coming from the outside.
I think yesterday or before yesterday, I saw a documentary about a recent rally of former President Trump, right, who apparently aspires to become president again in 2024. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm a European. I'm living in Europe. For us, it's really extraordinary, the whole Trump saga, right? But what's really astonishing is that the following that he has, the fever of this really intense emotional outbreak in regards to Trump. Then when you listen what is said, not only by himself, but also by the speakers who, tried to promote him, again, for an outsider, it's hard to believe that anybody can believe what is said there. And then you look at thousands of people cheering and apparently completely taking in this information, which with a little bit of research and critical thinking, at least for an outsider, seems so obvious incorrect. I don't want to say even false.
Yeah, no, I agree. He is just aggressively lying. A lot of his lies are not necessarily about policy. They're more about himself. We had 2 million people demonstrating for me, and there were maybe a couple of hundred. So that kind of nonsense. He's an accomplished narcissist. The lying goes on the other side as well, except they're like Barack Obama was so well liked in Europe. He was a liar as well, but much more sophisticated and much more believable. So right now in the political realm, the lying is all over the place, and I'm not a Republican, but I'm conservative in my thinking, and I look at my conservative friends, and some of these people are like good people, and yet they are twisting the truth because they want to achieve some kind of an effect. It's horrible for somebody who has the reputation to be brutally honest and who was a great liar himself. It's mind blowing. It's very destructive to society.
It's destructive and it's dangerous.
Yes,
because there's no reference point anymore.
Yes,
that we can use as a benchmark.
That's right.
Truth is completely out of the window. Whom can we trust if something really happens, right?
Let me give you an example. It's not necessarily. It's just because it came up. Like, for instance, I heard a politician, a senator, say that Ukraine has been a democracy since the Soviet Union disappeared. That's a damn lie. Okay. And there are no Nazis in Ukraine. That's also a damn lie. So we don't like the shades of gray. That's too complicated. We want black and white. We're lazy, right? People don't want to think anymore. Yes.
They're cognitive lazy.
Absolutely.
Yeah? We have, coming back to what I said at the beginning, our cognitive biases. We know of 89 or 100 different cognitive biases. They're researched, they're well researched.
Right.
We know the effect, we know how effective they are. Yeah? And one of the result of these combined cognitive biases is that our brain has to economize its energy, right? So we take heuristics, our brain takes shortcuts.
And I think part of the reason is that we are subject to a whole lot more messages, stimuli. The world has gotten so complicated, and when I see there are besides me 3 adults living in this house, and most often you see them running around with their face on a screen. I don't do that with my phone. I work on the computer because that's what I do, and occasionally I watch something. But and we are just inundated with signals. So how do we process all of this? Black and white. Putin bad, Ukraine good. Enough. I don't need to know anymore. And so.
Yeah, you're very right. Jack, it was my pleasure talking to you.
Oh, good on. If you don't mind, I can put a plug in for my podcast. It's
yes, of course.
It's called The Agent. It's based on my life. It's professionally produced.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. It's 12 episodes, and where I am talking, but also a dozen people who played a role in my life, such as the agent who headed the investigation, and who's a good friend of mine now. So this is and if people don't want to read the book, this is a real nice shortcut.
Very good, and I will blind it into the video.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure. Now tell me, you sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Are you Austrian?
I'll be back. Yes. All right.
My wife is very disappointed that I don't speak like Arnold Schwarzenegger. She thinks that accent is very sexy.